Hello there and a very good morning to you. Welcome to today's programme. Now, it's been the issue that's been making the headlines for the past week. It continues to do so. It's climate change and COP26, of course, in Glasgow. And there today, the theme is adaptation, loss and damage, and delivering the practical solutions that we need to address now to combat the effects of climate change and how we address the loss and damage caused up until this point. And with that in mind, we're here to talk to a number of climate crisis and nature experts. Today's aim is to hear from a number of different perspectives, and later on we're going to give you the opportunity also to put your question and answers to some of our panel who will be joining us very shortly, giving us some presentations and answering some questions along the way. But before we get underway with that, I'd like to take the opportunity first to welcome onto the stage Lord Mayor of Belfast. Very good morning to you. A very important issue, isn't it?
It's such an important issue, something we're highly conscious of in Belfast City Council. Our resilience strategy, which is our climate action plan, really focuses on adaptation and what we can do to find nature-based solutions. So we're leading on the 1 million trees project. We have our Upsurge soil project, which is going to be starting quite soon in partnership with Queen's University. And we really recognise that partnership is essential for dealing with any of these things. Belfast City Council co-chairs the Climate Commission along with Queen's University. We work with a number of the key anchor institutions in the city, and we recognise that how we tackle these things is by working together. So what's so wonderful about today is, well, adaptation is the key on the agenda in Glasgow at COP26. It is in Northern Ireland as well, and councils across Northern Ireland are really looking at what we can do to embrace nature-based solutions, and you're going to hear from some fantastic speakers today about what we're dealing with. So I hope everyone has a wonderful webinar, very thought-provoking, and helps us to think about what more we can be doing in our own communities.
And you were part of that climate change march on Saturday through Belfast. There seemed to be a real appetite to get out there and change what we need to do in the future.
There's so much appetite, and we know from children and young people that confidence and trust is at an all-time low, and they don't need sound bites from politicians. They just need evidence of action and what we're delivering. And so we're really committed to doing that. We have our action plan. We have key things that we're going to deliver. Our 1 million trees project is so exciting, looking at soil, looking at different things that we can do using our blue and green spaces, better. And that's how we're going to restore that trust and faith is by action.
Well, look, I'll leave it there with you, Lord Mayor. Thank you very much. And joining us for our first presentation will be from the Belfast Hills Partnership, and it'll be Jim Bradley. So Jim Bradley will be joining us onto the stage momentarily. A very good morning to you, Jim. A lot of people would think at the moment Belfast Hills, what there can change climate change, but there's a lot to be done.
Absolutely. We're primarily here today to talk about what we're doing as far as woodland in the Belfast Hills is concerned. One of the first things that people ask is, where are the Belfast Hills? So if you don't mind, I'll talk specifically about that.
Sure.
This is an image taken from, when the hill goes up the M2, just north of Cave Hill. So that's looking down southwest. There's a line of hills that hem in Belfast, and that's the area that we're involved in trying to manage that better. So you can see here it's a line of hills, not too much in the way of woodland there. Primarily the woodlands along the edge of the city, and what we're trying to do is plant up more trees. We've been in existence since 2004. We've been planting roughly 7,000 to 10,000 trees a year. And when we began, we were planting primarily for biodiversity, trying to link up different sorts of woodland, thicken up hedgerows, fill in gaps, and working with local communities to do so. We were also trying to change the landscape, improve the landscape as well. But of course, now we're realising that there are other reasons for planting up trees, and we're planting quite a lot more. Obviously, there's to fix and sequester carbon from a climate point of view, but also we're looking to alleviate flooding. A lot of the water and rivers that are flowing off the hills are important in terms of flooding and water management in the whole of Belfast. So there's that link between the hills and how we're managing Belfast. And planting trees is a very good and very cheap way to alleviate a part of the problem and the increasing problem we'll see as far as the effects of climate change are concerned. So there are a range of issues to consider. We're all very keen to go out and plant trees, but we've got lots of other things to think about, particularly from a climate point of view. There are a couple of obvious things that we need to do. We must make sure we don't plant on peat. That has a very negative impact in terms of releasing carbon. So quite a few people are aware of that, and we have peatland up at the top of the hills, the summits. But we also need to plant native species. The more local stock, the better. And we have just started our tree nursery, and we're taking very local seed to try to grow our own trees. And of course, that leads to one other question as to where are we going to get all these trees that we need to plant. There are other issues. There's the biodiversity value and carbon of other habitats. People think that we would plant on, for instance, in that image there, you can see all the fields. People think that we can plant on any of those grasslands, but you've got to remember that we've got some very rare habitats and very important habitats, species-rich grassland, areas in the hills and in all of our countryside that are very important from a biodiversity point of view. And it's so easy to take areas that are of high biodiversity value that we're not aware of and just decide that that's a good place to plant trees. So often there's sites where you've got a very wet area and people decide that's the place to plant trees because we don't know what else to do with that. And that could be the last place or the worst place to plant up, both from a carbon point of view and from a wildlife point of view. There's connectivity. How does this all connect up? And what extra can we bring from a carbon point of view and from a biodiversity point of view if we connect up our woodlands? So we've got to remember that as well. But you've got to remember that Belfast Hills, you're asking about the specific role of the Belfast Hills. We have a wildfire issue, as other sites do, such as the Mournes, etc. So if you look at that image and you've got young trees growing up and amongst rough grassland, what's that going to be like in a few years' time? How are we going to make sure that doesn't suffer from wildfires? So that's another aspect of the practical management of what we have in front of us. Also, there's plastic tree guards. That's a big issue that ourselves and our partners, the Woodland Trust, are looking at. What's the alternatives that we need? Because we need tree guards. There are a number of small sites in the hills that we've planted up recently, and we have anything up to 80–85% mortality because of hares, Irish hares. So we've got good Irish hare populations, but in looking at some of the practical aspects, we can't use plastic anymore for obvious reasons. So what are we going to do as far as managing those issues and problems are concerned? But the one particular point I want to make is how are we going to manage the future woodlands and how we're managing the current ones. We all think about planting new trees. We should remember how are we going to manage the existing trees, the existing woodland that we have, particularly from a carbon point of view, but also for biodiversity, for landscape. We've all gone out and well, many of us have gone out and planted trees, gone out on a Saturday morning in a public event, planted some trees, think we're doing a great job. But we have to think about how we're going to manage those in the future. A tree can be £1 or £2. When organisations are saying we need much more than that per tree, it's because those trees have to be managed for years to come. If you think about saplings, those trees, in the same way as we think about newborns, if you plant a tree and think you've done a great job and leave it, there are places I've seen in the past where those aren't managed. It's almost like leaving your baby in the hospital after it's born, or thinking that once the baby is born, that's the job done. So that's what we've got to think of. We've got to think about how we manage the woodland that we have. This is a great image here, just the same what I showed at the start. The area over to the right is ancient woodland, and it's fantastic from a carbon point of view. It's hazelwood, so that's been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But you can see we've also got woodland in Belfast Castle Estate and Cave Hill. Those are under threat in terms of invasive species. You've got high percentages of ash. You've got this disease ash dieback that's going to kill a very high proportion of that. So we can't think just about planting new trees. We have to think about how are we going to manage those? How are we going to replace those trees? Are there new saplings coming underneath? So management of existing woodland is just as important as planting trees and creating new woodland from a carbon and from a climate change point of view.
But I'm guessing behind the scenes there is a lot of work going on to identify areas where you can go out and plant as many trees as you
Yes.
want in order to,
Yeah.
to reach the target of, I don't know, 1 million trees, that kind of thing.
Yes, and you might assume that we know all of the habitats and wildlife that we have in each place, but that's not always the case. So we in particular put a focus on ensuring that we survey sites and know which areas are going to be planted and which areas should be planted and which areas should be left alone. Some of those upland pastures and species-rich grasslands, if they've been pasture for years, hold a very large amount of carbon. And it actually is a big mistake to, for instance, it has happened where you plough up old grassland and plant trees, and it can be many, many decades before that becomes carbon positive again. So we've got to look at what we've got, both from a woodland point of view and from the other habitats point of view, from a carbon point of view, from a flood alleviation point of view, and from a biodiversity point of view.
So it's not going to change overnight. It takes a lot of planning, perhaps years in planning, but hopefully once we're there, we can get going and it's plain sailing from then.
Yes, and we've got such high targets in terms of creating new woodland, but we've also got to work out how we're going to manage that new woodland and how we're going to manage better the existing woodland that we have. That's so important from a climate change point of view.
And just finally, how hopeful are you that all of your targets can be reached?
Things are moving very well in terms of identifying sites that we can plant. One of the particular issues we have is if we want to plant local native species, it's that tree supply is another issue. So today I hope I've shown you some of the practical issues that we have in terms of improving not just the Belfast Hills in Belfast, but all of our countryside in terms of woodland, new woodland, existing woodland and climate adaptation.
Well, look, Jim, all the best for that. Hope it all goes well with you. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. So that was the first of our presentations this morning. Our next guest is Gawain Morrison, who was involved with the Ogren Grove. You may remember that outside St Anne's Cathedral in September. Very welcome this morning. Talk to us a little bit about that project, if you will, before your presentation.
Yeah, well, of course. The Ogren Grove was the main site installation for Culture Night this year, and its inspiration came from the Druidic writing system, the and it was an alphabet that had an association with 20 native trees of the islands, and each of those then had the enlightened Celtic civilization. They were aware of their physical attributes, their medicinal attributes, most of which are still used today, their magical attributes and how that you used them to reflect on self. But it wasn't just the trees, it was the nature, it was the environment, but also then their awareness of the way that the sun and the moon influenced it. So it was a sort of a holistic awareness of nature. And then it influenced their art, their music, their culture, their language. And all of this was how they lived. It was a very harmonious and in balance setup. So the video we're going to show here is really just covered those themes, but also how we approached sustainability in art, and how important it is for art to kickstart conversation and behaviour change.
Okay, well, look, let's take a look at your presentation.
Culture Night was one of the biggest free cultural events in the city centre. I mean, the last one in 2019, we had over 100,000 people. Obviously, with COVID, doing something like that now is just completely impossible. But the pandemic gave us time and a breathing space really to think about what we wanted to do with the event. We wanted to do something that was outdoors based. We wanted to do something that was about the environment and something that was about nature and sort of something that maybe felt that it reflected everything we've all been through over the last 18 months or so. That was really the thinking behind approaching things in a completely different way.
Well, the inspiration of all of this came from the writing system. The Druids were astronomers, mathematicians, poets, artists, and linguists. The tree alphabet itself was a means of communication, and all of this was tied into the lunar cycles, the solar cycles, and being aware of the environment around us, the universe that we exist in, and how it all influences how we live as beings.
This is it. This is the last one. Right.
So these are very important, and actually the Culture Night Belfast dates this year are tied into pretty much the same date as the autumn equinox. And this is an important time for harvesting, preparing for the oncoming winter and the darkness. The autumn equinox is when we've got the balance, the perfect balance between night and day, and then we transit towards Halloween whenever we're at the thinnest between ourselves and the fairy world. The lunar cycle then of the waxing and the waning, and a monthly cycle of when we should be aware of what's going on when the moon is there, is also very much a part of the importance of living with our planet and our trees and our solar system. This is a beautiful one. Look at the fingers coming out from it. The sustainability part of this has been a thread for the whole thing. We are in this project intercepting the materials that we're using for our structures from, if we're buying it for the first time, we already know where it's going to go to as its next use. Like the likes of pallets and the wood that we have. We're using those before they go on to be used as pallets for other things. We're doing our best with this to make sure that we have the smallest footprint of waste as possible and maximising the reusability of this. It doesn't matter what age group, what demographic, what background, when you have a conversation about an environment and you say, we need the trees, we need not to be wrecking the planet, why are we where we are?
Yeah, I think perhaps people have assumed that if we just keep consuming it, that's the answer to all our problems. If we own more things, if we have more things, we will find happiness and satisfaction. And I think at the beginning of the 21st century, we realised that those aren't the answers, that we need to explore somewhere deeper. In some ways, the natural world can be as cruel as it can be kind. You don't just let the strongest always dominate. Sometimes the small things and the little things that matter just as much as the dominant things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which is all this is about.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting. We've only been here for 3 days and it already feels like a different space. It's just amazing how fast people are just coming here and hanging out and just being here, where as before it was just a thoroughfare to something else. When you do the right thing with it, all it needs is a bit of love and a bit of attention and a bit of money, and it's an amazing space for the people.
You're never quite sure whether it's just a load of art nonsense or whether it's actually going to come to be, and it has. I hope it lives long in people's memories.
I mean, clearly people were going in their droves to see this. I mean, was it something that you always had in your mind, or were you thrown into the deep end and had to come up with this concept quickly for Culture Night?
So the theme was around the urban garden. That was the original brief for the whole thing. And my mum had told me about the characters in the writing system the year previous to it. So I had a bit of a fascination about it. Not really looked into it in great depth. And then when we got awarded the proposal for it, then started devouring books about the whole thing and just went down the rabbit hole of what did this mean. And it's so many layers of your awareness of your space, the history in it, the language that they used, the associations with it all. So it was a lot of work in a very short space of time to achieve what it was, and a lot of people threw a lot of graft in to make it happen.
And in terms of climate change and the art itself, a lot of that was recycled materials and reusing stuff that we've already made. It's already out there.
Yeah, it was important to us from a sustainable point of view that it was either intercepting materials on their sort of use flow journey from one place to the next. So like the pallets we were able to get from a place that went on to become pallets. Not all of them, but a good chunk of them. The scaffold boards that made the big centerpiece structure, you know, they were end of life for use on building sites, but they'd go on to be used in sort of like railway sleepers and gardens and things. And the plastic itself was a highly recyclable plastic, and it is made from recycled plastic. So we worked very hard at being able to work out how do we make this work from a sustainable point of view, and maximise the use of it without as much waste as possible.
And did you get a sense that people were aware of that and were appreciative of that?
In conversation when you're having, because people came and spent time at the thing. This is what was beautiful about the whole thing. People came and spent time in the space. As a space, it's quite a sort of thoroughfare normally, but people were coming and taking time and sitting with kids or partners ourselves, and then having conversations and wanting to know more about the how it came to be, the sustainability part of it, but also then the journey. And we had a whole trail that you could go around the cathedral quarter with. So people got inside it and wanted to understand more about the nature of the trees, the themes, and everything about it.
And it was making them aware of some issues that they perhaps weren't even aware was out there at the minute in terms of the trees and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a lot of awareness. What I loved was the awareness of their environment. We had a tagline: look up, look around, look in, and look up to what's around you, and not even just the stars and moon, but the space around you, the buildings that we have. Do you want it to be all just shiny glass and plastic, or do you want it to have character? Do you want there to be trees about the place? What environment do you want to live in that will make you enjoy the space you live in and share it with others?
And I suppose it was also proving that we don't need to go out there and make new plastic or take down new trees. You can use material that we already have, and you can design something as grand as that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a very important component to where use what we have around you, but work in balance and harmony with it.
Okay, look, well, Calvin, thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for the presentation. And hopefully you did get to go down there and experience it at St. Anne's Cathedral. So we're on to our next guest today. From the Ulster Wildlife, please welcome Anika, I apologise, Anika Clements. You've been doing some very important work.
Yes, we have been involved in really trying to highlight the role of nature-based solutions to climate change. So nature-based solutions really is about the role that nature can play in tackling climate change, both in terms of locking away carbon, but also in adapting to the worst impacts of climate change. And we've heard this morning from Jim about planting trees and the role of woodlands. We've also heard mention in his presentation about peatlands and not to plant trees on peatlands. And we recognise that peatlands are really important for storing away carbon. And when they're degraded, they release carbon. So we need to make sure we protect them and restore them. But one of the lesser known nature-based solutions is blue carbon. So blue carbon refers to the habitats in our oceans and around our coasts, so things like salt marsh and seagrass and oyster reefs. And the oceans, as we know, cover 70% of the world, and they're hugely important in our response to climate change. We know that over 90% of the energy that's been generated by greenhouse gases, trapped, all that extra heat, has actually gone into the oceans and has buffered us from the worst impacts of climate change. So we'd be seeing much more extreme temperatures than we are currently if it wasn't for the oceans. And each year, they're actually locking away around 30% of human-made carbon dioxide emissions. And so they're really, really important in protecting us from the worst impacts of climate change and can be a big part in our action and activity around climate change. But we're at the real start of understanding the role of blue carbon, and locally, as yet, we don't have any blue carbon restoration projects. But I just want to use this opportunity to really highlight the possibilities of blue carbon. So I have a lovely video by my colleague Heidi that was produced with funding from the Marine Institute in Galway, which just introduces us all to the concept of blue carbon around Northern Ireland.
Great, let's take a look at that.
So the ocean plays a significant role in the global carbon cycle. In fact, 93% of carbon dioxide is cycled or stored throughout our oceans. Blue carbon is the carbon that's sequestered or absorbed and stored in marine and coastal environments. It can be stored in the leaves of seagrass, fronds of kelp, and in the animal tissue and shells and mussels and oysters. But it can also be stored in the non-living components, such as the mud at the bottom of sea lochs. Seagrasses are our only flowering plant that lives fully submerged in the marine environment. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, and then the carbon gets stored in their leaves and their roots and their rhizomes. Healthy seagrass beds will also store carbon in the sediment. Shellfish can also store carbon. They're filter feeders, so they'll take particles out of the water and then that goes into their tissue and their shells. And they'll then deposit their feces and pseudofeces on the seabed, and as the reef grows, the sediment and those particles get trapped underneath. Crucially, we know that the destruction and damage of blue carbon habitats can lead to release of carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Ulster Wildlife's recent blue carbon report was the first step for Northern Ireland to explore its blue carbon habitats. And it found that it's likely that 50% of these habitats are already within our marine protected area network. And that's a really significant find because it means that the policy tools to protect and conserve these blue carbon stores already exist. Restoration of blue carbon habitats is going to play a significant role in our suite of nature-based solutions to fight climate change. And it's already happening across the UK. Seagrass is being planted, native oyster reefs are being built, and salt marshes are being reflooded. Northern Ireland is the only part of the UK that doesn't currently have any restoration work. So it's important that we learn from our counterparts and start our own blue carbon journey. By restoring these habitats, we'll bring our seas back to life, increase biodiversity, improve water quality, and enhance natural coastal protection.
You know, with such a large amount of coastline, something like that, and the targets perhaps that you want to set in terms of blue carbon, it must be a big, big challenge.
Absolutely. We're at the very beginning of our journey with blue carbon. The first thing really is to understand all the roles that these habitats can play. So I've spoken a bit about their ability to lock away carbon, but a lot of these coastal habitats are also really important in protecting against the worst waves from storms and from erosion. And they also help with flooding around the coast. Salt marshes are really, really valuable in that, as are oyster reefs and seagrass beds. And kelp as well helps dissipate the wave energy as it's coming towards our coast. So we know that these play an important role, but we don't quite know like the detailed numbers of what does it lock down in terms of carbon. But what we do know is that we must ensure they're well protected, and there's opportunities to restore a lot of those habitats. Many of those habitats have been lost, particularly in more urban areas where we've had to do lots of dredging and sort of land reclamation. We've changed the coastline. We now need to really preserve what remains and look at restoring those areas for all those benefits.
And how do we do that?
Well, there's some brilliant projects globally, but in the UK and Ireland as well, that we can learn from. So a lot of these are partnership projects. Some of them have private investment. A really famous example is Glenmorangie and Whisky Distillery have partnered with Heriot-Watt University and with the Marine Conservation Society in Scotland to restore a huge amount of native oysters in the Dornoch Firth. So there's lots of examples of how to do it. There's a lot of scientists working on the best methods. With salt marsh, you can use similar restoration techniques to what we do on peatlands, using these like coir sausages to basically block up some of the drains to make sure that the water is retained, and that helps the sediment accumulate and all those plants grow and all the biodiversity flourish. So there's lots of techniques that we've learned from elsewhere that we're really keen to apply locally.
But would it be a simple case that people can go out and help, or is there a lot of money needed to do something like that?
Well, I think at first you can start off with sort of pilot projects, but really to make a big difference, we need to do this at scale, and that of course will require a lot of investment and partnership working. We're really keen that we have a great range of skills. One's from the land, like we have a lot of peatland restoration projects in Northern Ireland. We can transfer a lot of those skills potentially to salt marsh. We've got a lot of our salt marsh protected already through National Trust properties. So there's all sorts of potential partnerships that could grow to look at restoring these. And we're just really keen that we start that journey and then we see how we can scale it up.
And looking forward, have you had any interested parties to work with you on this, or do you see this is going to be a big challenge for you?
I think this is an exciting time. I think we're just beginning to realise the potential. This year we received some funding from DERA under the Challenge Fund to develop an oyster nursery. So this is a native oyster nursery in partnership with Bangor Marina. And it's basically these series of cages with adult oysters that will produce babies, and the spat will flow out and go into the surrounding seas and help restore some of the oyster reefs in Belfast Loch. So that's a really small scale project. There are oyster nurseries in other parts of the UK. We're just trialling it here to see how easy is it to get these put into marina locally. And then if that's successful, it's something that could be rolled out to other marinas in Northern Ireland and doesn't require huge amounts of investment.
Well, look, Anika, very best of luck with all of that in the future. Thank you very much for joining us this morning with your presentation. Thank you. So Anika was our third guest today. We're going to now welcome from the Eastside Partnership in Belfast, Michelle Bryans. Very good morning to you, Michelle.
Good morning.
So talk me through a little bit about what you've been doing and working on.
So I work at Eastside Partnership, which is a regeneration charity in East Belfast, and I've been there for about 6 years. But what I'm here to talk about today is the development of Connswater Community Greenway, which has almost been a bit of a green movement in the east of the city. And it's really helped local people, almost see their lives through a green lens without even realising it. So we now have a population of people that are really well connected to their local environment and are getting outdoors and cycling, walking, hopping and skipping and doing all sorts of fun things.
And if it wasn't there, they wouldn't be get that opportunity.
Yeah,
and you have a presentation to show us today.
Yes, yeah. So I'm going to just talk a wee bit about the difference and what impact the Greenway's had and local people in the area. And as I mentioned, I work for an organisation called Eastside Partnership, which is a regeneration organisation, and I suppose everything that we're trying to do is essentially to make life better, for people that live in the community. But I want to start off by taking us back to 2007, and this is the Connswater River, which is right in the heart of East Belfast, and these pictures show the river connecting at Victoria Park and a place called the Hollow. And as you can see, it's quite a very bleak, depressing picture of what our rivers used to look like.
It's not really somewhere you would want to go for a walk or a stroll with a dog.
And down at the bottom right, you can see a little mallard duck there that was obviously very struggling to survive and actually extremely poor sanitation. And as somebody who's lived in East Belfast for pretty much all my life, I can truly say the river was something that we never really appreciated as people that lived in the community. And it was seriously a huge dumping ground. So in 2007, there was a funding opportunity with the National Lottery Fund called Living Landmarks. And Eastside Partnership applied for that alongside our partners at Belfast City Council, for instance. And we're successful in a £23.6 million bid. And the whole idea of this project was to clean the river up, but also to connect East Belfast with a 16-kilometre network. So we now have a greenway that connects 40,000 residents from the Castlereagh Hills of Craig Glen right through the heart of East Belfast and then down to Victoria Park. So we have pathways, we've restored our rivers, and this project here was a natural flood defence system. And during COP26 and climate adaptation, we can hear a lot of people talking about flood alleviation and the negative impact that flooding has on communities. So this is Orangefield Park, and this picture down at the bottom left is where the river used to flow, and you can see how the close proximity that was to residents. And through this scheme we moved the river into the middle of the park. And on days of heavy rainfall, which happens quite frequently, Orangefield Park now floods as a natural flood defence system. So it's what we describe as like a natural sink, and it means the river isn't flooding about approximately 1,700 properties in East Belfast, and people are now delighted they're able to get home insurance, which is great. Play and recreation and people have been really important for us throughout this project. and the Greenway was always designed and built to ensure that local people were involved in that process, but it was about it being something to do, you know, we also describe it as our outdoor community centre. You know, it's a leisure and recreational facility as much as it is cycling from A to B. So ensuring that children and families had something to do along the way was really important. And this play park is at Flora Street Walkway, and also known as Avenue. Connecting communities through bridges, again, was really important. So we've installed 23 new or improved bridges along the Greenway, and have named them after either local people or points of interest and heritage. And Grace Banister was our first bridge to be named after a female, and was also the First Lady Lord Mayor in Belfast, and just lived there at Grand Parade. We still remain the first park in Belfast to be open 24/7. And the whole Greenway is open and lit 24/7, and it means that people are connected to their local environment at any time of the day. And that's really helped with usage of the Greenway, and we genuinely have people out cycling or walking their dog early morning or late at night. Siesta Square is right at the heart of the Greenway, and prior to that being built, it was a derelict space. And that's really, for me, been a bit of a game changer for East Belfast, and has brought people from all across the city to come there for events or animation. But most important, it's an outdoor space for local people to sit and enjoy, meet their friends in an inner city community. When the Greenway was built in 2017, we have taken on a bit of a sustainability approach. Often, you know, projects like this are built and people move on to different things, but alongside Belfast City Council, we are working to ensure that the Greenway continues to deliver against everything we wanted to achieve, and that was about improving the lives and health and well-being of local people, but also improving the environment. So we continue to work with the council to ensure that the Greenway is well loved and looked after, but ensuring that local people do that alongside us. So you can see through these pictures just some of the people that are using it on a daily basis. And we have Victor, our skateboarding dog, who genuinely learned to skateboard at Siesta Square, but he helped put us on the map. And the environment, again, we have local children walking to school every day, and on that journey they're able to spot kingfishers, herons and egrets, and a community that's able to do that in an inner city, that's really important in terms of local people have been able to appreciate the importance of environment.
And clearly, I mean, that's taken an awful long time to do, but when you see the before pictures and the after pictures, it was well worth it.
Yeah. I think the transformation for me is, we always need to try and remember that. You know, as somebody who works on the project and sees it every day, you need to remind yourself of what it was like before and what it's like now. And this is Davy on the screen here, who lives just along the Loop River of the Greenway. And we built a flood defence system outside the back of his home. And we were genuinely building the Greenway in his back garden for about 18 months. So him and his neighbours were a bit frustrated for a while. But he now actually works with us as a Greenway leader. And he is one of those people who says that the Greenway has completely transformed his life and transformed the area. And he says he's out walking every day, and he helps lead walking groups for us. So he is just one of those people who can really see the difference it's made to him.
And I'm assuming that during COVID lockdowns, for example, when there was nothing really else to do in terms of going shopping or in the restaurants, people were getting out and about more to their local areas, their outdoor areas for walks. I mean, can you imagine what it would have been like if this project hadn't taken place during that time?
For us, the Greenway, you know, it was a real kind of silver lining for people, and the feedback, you know, was amazing, and the Greenway became extremely busy at times too, but it was a real lifeline and asset for people. And for those in East Belfast, they were able to just get outdoors and in fresh air, and I suppose protect and support their mental health at a time when things were really challenging. So I was delighted to see the Greenway was a really supportive mechanism during that, you know, tough time.
Yeah.
I can't do this presentation during COP26 without mentioning Sir David Attenborough, but this is just one example of the type of projects we deliver to connect people with the environment and the Greenway. And we made this little book called What's Growing on the Greenway, and encouraged local people to go out and take photographs of the flora and fauna. And we've done that during a year. So it was an online weekly blog, And with that, then we educated people about the different types of landscape, and we deliver that alongside our landscape architects at Paul Hogarth Company. But the book was submitted for a Landscape Institute Award about 2 years ago over in London. And Sir David Attenborough was there, and I was absolutely delighted to see it winning the overall President's Award. And there's about 2,000 people in the room, and the reason why it won was the fact that local people were involved and appreciated and supported their local environment. So that's our Greenway claim to fame. Barry mentioned about COVID there, and for us, community engagement and listening to the needs of the community is really important, and that has always been a real strength of the Connswater Community Greenway. And even though it's built, we still want to listen to people about how we can support their use. So just this summer we went out and chatted to our users, and probably the one negative thing people come up to say was that it was too busy, and that was during lockdown. But that I suppose could be seen as a bit of a success too. But some of the things people are saying, that it continues to be an inclusive space, it's community building, and it really educates people about their local environment.
And it's just connecting with that environment and where they live, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. It's you know, it's on their doorstep, which is really important, which is great. And so it's just where we are at now in terms of how we look to the future. We have developed a strategy called Eastside Greenway. So East Belfast is extremely lucky to have the Cumber Greenway and Connswater Community Greenway, but certainly there's gaps in that network. So we want to ensure that every resident in every area in East Belfast is connected with a Greenway network, and we're currently working with our stakeholders at Belfast City Council, DFI and Sustrans, for instance, to try and really build on the success of both of those greenways. And also just during lockdown, we wanted to mention about, I suppose, how we adapt and do different things. And we ran a webinar series on kind of sustainability and called that Go Eastside, and connected researchers, policymakers and practitioners, as we have a real ambition and vision to ensure that East Belfast is a sustainable place, but also that we educate and engage with local people, because a lot of these issues around environment and sustainability actually have a huge impact on the communities that live in multiple deprivation and disadvantage. So we see our role to try and educate and connect people to those strong, important issues.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's been very busy, the success is there, and looking to the future, given what you've already achieved, I mean, you must be optimistic about what you're going to go on to achieve.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So across Eastside Partnership, for instance, greenways are extremely important for us, but the physical regeneration of East Belfast continues to be important, and we want to ensure that residents continue to live a healthy lifestyle, you know, have a healthy, livable place. And we are passionate about the regeneration of other areas in East Belfast, such as the Newton Ards Road. But through our other projects at our education team and our tourism team and our arts team, we want to ensure that East Belfast is a really creative, vibrant place and is a destination. And we are definitely seeing signs of people wanting to come to East to live and enjoy and explore the area. So yeah, exciting times ahead.
Well, look, best of luck with you. Thank you very much for your time this morning, your presentation. That concludes, for now at least, our presentations. In just a few moments' time, our guests are going to come back on stage. We're going to have just a quick question and answer session with them. If you do have any questions and you're watching at home, just type them in there on the chat box, and hopefully we'll put some of your questions to our panel. We'll be back in about a minute's time with those questions and answers. Okay, well, welcome back. Didn't take too long, thankfully. So just to go back to our panel just quickly, you know, thinking about what you're trying to achieve and what's happening in Glasgow at the moment, what do you take from what's happening there? Are you optimistic about what's happening?
Mixed. I think Glasgow really shows the strength of feeling, and that there is a shift in terms of people's opinions. I think also it's what we've seen in the last year. For instance, with wildfires, we all realise, and with the weather, of course, Mara, we all can see we can start to see the writing on the wall. And that's the sense I get when I'm talking to people, as well as what we see as far as COP26 in Glasgow is concerned.
Is that the kind of thing that you had been hearing when you were working on that project for Siesta Square?
Absolutely. I think from our perspective, you know, we represent culture. Our art represents culture. Culture is where people are at that moment, and then the momentum comes from that, and political will and movement comes from that on top of people pushing to have it. I think the fact that there's so many eyeballs on COP26, there's such a lot of noise. Lord Mayor was talking earlier about the youth conference and how passionate they felt about it. You know, the momentum here is shifted considerably.
And Danica, in terms of what you're trying to achieve, are you happy with some of the agreements that have been put in place so far and what is potentially going to be agreed in the coming days?
Yeah, I think certainly we can see a real will to progress, and there have been some good and encouraging announcements. This morning I was actually looking at something called the Climate Action Tracker, which looks at the gap between kind of pledges, promises and actual actions. And they're trying to reflect, as all these announcements are made at COP26, is that beginning to narrow? And there's some encouraging progress, but there's still a long way to go. Certainly Saturday was Nature Day, and there was a degree of commitment around land use and agriculture. I guess from the ocean's perspective, we were hoping for maybe a little bit more on Saturday, which didn't come then, but maybe there'll be progress during this week. So I think there's definitely a great deal of will, but the commitments so far are not quite where we'd like them.
And Michelle, I mean, we have people from all around the world leaders there, but the kind of project you're doing shows it's not just world leaders, it's local people who are able to achieve big things.
Yeah, I think COP26 has been amazing to raise the profile. I think the marketing and PR is really important because you can see it everywhere. You know, you can't go on social media without seeing people talk about it. But I suppose for me, as somebody who represents a local community, it's important that actually we go a wee bit deeper into local communities and actually maybe go into schools or maybe into residence groups or community groups, because there is a bit of cynicism at times around these issues, and I think without action and results then people don't necessarily really see the importance or buy into it as much. So I do think at a government level we need to go deeper, you know, into local communities.
And suppose whenever people talk about adaptation and nature, you know, that's something that will really connect with what you're doing, because it is the local area, it is local nature, and it's how we use it and to go forward.
Yeah, I think it's certainly the Greenway is a good example of how, and you know, the work that you guys are doing as well, that you can connect people with nature and raise education awareness without actually people really realising it. It just becomes part of their daily lives, and I think that's so important.
And you know, there are fears and frustrations still, no matter what's been agreed or what's going to be agreed. Not everyone's ever going to be completely happy, though, are they?
No, but I think we need to see really strong leadership, and I think that's certainly what the young people have been asking for. We were at the climate change rally on Saturday, and it was great to listen to the speakers, particularly the young people, and I think they do want to see that action, and they are very concerned about the risks to their own livelihoods in their own lifetimes. So I think we need to see that degree of ambition, and we'd like to see that reflected, you know, from COP26, but also very much at a local level, and need a huge amount of investment in these projects. Certainly a lot of the nature-based solutions are fantastic, but they take a while to really build up. So if you're planting trees, it takes time for them to grow. If you're restoring salt marsh, that takes time. So we need investment really quickly this decade to reap the benefits in 20, 30, 40 years' time. And that's really the key thing, is to get that investment now.
And those youth who were out protesting are saying that they're crying out to have their voices heard and to be involved with projects. Was that something you were able to find very easily, that youth were wanting to get involved with your project, for example?
Absolutely. We actually had a friend whose daughter and their friends were doing their A-level art. Unfortunately, it was just they didn't have the skills for what we needed, but they had contacted us to be involved. And there's this, people want to do something. This is the thing. People want to do something. And we were talking earlier, you can't just go onto a field and go and start planting stuff because somebody owns that field. So there needs to be this communication. There needs to be a clear, these are the guidelines, these are what we're going to do, and this is what we'd love you to help us with. And if that is all out there, then you will get people coming forward in their droves.
Yeah, I mean, it is one thing that people always identify with climate change, planting trees, planting trees. So I'm sure you're coming down with volunteers to go out there and wanting to help and get involved.
Yes, and it's young people in particular. There's quite a sea change. We're actually about to come to the end of a project where we're planting a tree for every young person that we were working with, and we're planting 12,000 trees up just behind Cave Hill. And I think that's a mark of not just the number of people that we're talking to, but also the number of people that we've managed to get physically involved, that are actually doing volunteer work. And volunteer work has been incredibly important on a personal level and at an individual level through lockdown. And luckily we've managed, because it's been outdoor work, to more or less keep that going. But we see more and more people wanting to get involved, whether it's in the tree nursery, whether it's up on all some of the other sites that we're working on, whether it's doing practical work in terms of taking away the invasive species that are causing problems in our woodland. So it's that practical involvement, and there seems to be no end to the amount of people that want to get physically involved. So yes, both there are people who both want to get involved in terms of lobbying and in terms of understanding the issues, but also in terms of getting out there and doing something physical that they can say, I've done my part.
Well, and we do have one question in for yourself, Michelle, from James McConville. Are Eastside Partnership able to provide direct support to other Greenway projects that require best practice support in other areas? He's thinking in particular of the Newry City Park project.
Absolutely. Pre-COVID, when we weren't able to really get out and do visits, I probably would host a visit to the Greenway every week. But certainly we've been approached by other councils across Northern Ireland and having done a bit of consultancy work over in West Belfast too, around Greenway Network. And just this on Thursday, I'm actually going in to speak with the Forth Meadow Community Greenway. So happy to follow up with James or any other councils just to chat about Clonswater.
I'm assuming you can get your contact details on your website, that kind of thing. Okay, James, thank you very much for your question. Okay, so we're almost out of time. So just give yourselves a chance to give us any closing words or any thoughts about what's happening locally and with COP26 in Glasgow. If you want, we'll start with yourself.
I think there's a tremendous appetite to do things. I suppose you can see from the presentation, I'm always looking at the practical aspects of how we bring forward change, but it's that appetite to get things on the ground, and I think that's what we'll see post COP26. The devil's going to be in the detail in terms of the policy, etc., but it's also what do people see happening in their own locality and in their own environment.
And Gowan?
Actually, the COP26 has made me start, and this panel actually made me start to look a lot deeper on what's going on here and reading up, and even just this morning here about the blue carbon stuff. The amount of people that are doing extraordinary things and are trying to do good things here is amazing, and I think it gives you a lot of hope that we can do it, but we do need the goodwill of politicians and effort and money to be able to make it happen. I don't think that's beyond the bounds. I just think it needs to start happening.
Michelle, your final thoughts?
Well, I think part of it is really making the most of partnership working. So we've heard a lot today, which are all projects that are involving multiple partners, and I think that's the thing to really harness, to make the most of. That, you know, we've got huge amounts of experience and expertise and research within Northern Ireland amongst lots of different types of sectors. If we can bring them together and actually deliver things on the ground, that gives people a real sense of hope, but it also provides a lot more solutions than we have currently.
And final thoughts to yourself, Michelle?
Yeah, I think for me, you know, young people going out to the rally on Saturday is so important, and I think leadership and investment, young people really deserve to be invested in. So I think any ways that we can support young people throughout this process is so important.
Look, thank you all very much for your time this morning and for your presentations, and best of luck with everything in the future. And to you at home and watching online, thank you very much for joining us as well, and best of luck to you too.